All right, so on to our first bug to fix, the first feature to change, fix the clicking dice or clicking of dice. Right now, we cannot freeze any dice as we've already seen many times. If I wanted to go for, let's say, a full house, I would freeze 1, 2, 2, and 1 and hope that this third die would roll and get a 1 or a 2. But right now, I click and disaster strikes. So give it a shot on your own, see if you can fix it, identify the problem, and then if not, afterwards, I'll have a solution in like 2 seconds. Okay. So what's happening here? Cannot read property set state of undefined. This dot set state, well, I can't find anything on this because this is undefined. Why does that happen? We've seen it a bunch of times. It's an issue with binding. So what is the method that's called? Well, it looks like here it's toggle locked. And we've already seen this flow where we pass toggle locked down as a prop to dice. The dice component in turn passes it down to each individual die. And then when we click on a die, finally the on click equals that toggle lock method, although it's given a different name because we pass it down through props. It is called and it runs, and it's supposed to update locked inside of the game component state. But right now we're getting stuck because the value of this is not defined. So right here we hit a problem. So this code is running, we're passing it down correctly, it's getting down to the die component, it's running when we click. What is happening? Well, we need to bind toggle locked. So I would look first over here where it's being passed down. Okay, we're not binding it here. So that means that it needs to be bound in the constructor. And what do you know? It's not being bound right now. This dot toggle locked equals this dot toggle locked dot bind this. So let's test it out. Over here, I'll start with a roll. I click. Seems like it worked. It's locked, right? Yeah, that one's staying as 1, but it's deceiving because if I click this one, why is this one being locked? If I click this one, it looks like no matter what I click, it's just going from the beginning and it continually locking until it hits the end. That's odd. So why is that happening? Well, let's understand how toggle locked works. So we're setting state using an index. So we have this array of dice or of numbers, right? We've already been over this. It looks like this inside of React. We have this array. Okay, so the numbers are here. Well, I have to roll first. 4, 1, 3, 2, 2. And then the locked array matches up with this. So the first one is 4, and it is currently unlocked, as we can see. The next one is 1, and it's unlocked. If I click on one of them, we just locked it, meaning that we're using the index of this die. So it's the 0th die. So we're updating index 0 of locked. But when I click here, we're updating index 1. So why is that happening? And it looks like, I don't know if you can see this, it's adding in new elements, just adding in trues at the beginning. And further down, like our array is growing. It should never be more than 5 items long. And now we've got 10 total items. So that's a problem. And if we look at where we're actually doing the logic, we're using this index in toggle locked. Let's say it's index 3. And we want to set state where we take the old version of locked and we keep everything the same from before that index. And then at that index, we're going to flip it from true to false or false to true, not state.locked at the index. And then we take the rest of the array and keep that the same as well. So we're just updating whatever that index is. So this seems fine. This isn't a problem. The logic works. But what is our index? Well, let's just do a console.log index and see what we get. So I'm going to start by rolling, and I'm going to click on the last die. So index should be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's what index is? What is this? Well, we've seen this before. I don't know if you saw the video or made it through the end, but when we were talking about events, this is an event object that's being passed through. It contains information about a mouse event. It will tell us, where the click happened, what the target was, different information about the actual event, but that's not at all what index should be. So why is that happening? Well, let's go to where it's actually being called. So we pass toggle lock down to dice and then down to die. So let's look in the die component. In the die component, we're simply calling this.props.handleClick. which handle click again is just the name that was created as a prop right here. And it is passing in the dice props handle click, which is coming from the game component. Further down, we can see it's called handle click. So these are just like names for this .toggle locked. It's how we pass them down. So inside of our component, the die component, this is going to call toggle locked, but we're not passing in the index anywhere. So we're not actually saying which thing should be toggled, 0 or 1 or 5 or whatever index, although 5 is out of bounds, so it should be 4 or less. And what's happening is that the event object is being automatically passed to that callback. So if we don't pass any sort of argument on our own, that is going to be passed, and that's what we're actually using as the index right now. And I demonstrated that in one of the videos on events. Often we want that event object, but if you don't want it, or it's not that we don't want it, but if you're not going to use it and you want to pass something else in its place, then you need to manually do that. So we need the index. We have a couple options. The easiest for now is just to do it inline with an arrow function. This.props.handleClick, we're going to pass in the index. How do we have access to the index? Well, if we look at the dice component, we can see where we're rendering each die. We're passing in IDX as index. So over here, once again, pull open our React tools, go to the game, go to dice. We can see that it has access through the props to the array of dice values. And then for each die, there's an index. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So now we just want to use inside of the die component, this.props.idx. And cross our fingers, click on one of them. Finally, no errors. And it's not just stylistic at this point. It should stay frozen. And it does. So is there anything we can go for here? 1, 2, 3. Okay, let's cross our fingers and hope we get a 3. No. Oh, actually, I meant, no, we wanted a 1, and we did. That's perfect. So now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we can get a large straight. And we get 40 points. All right, so the locking is working now because we're passing in the index, and we can verify that in our console. As I click on the first one, we get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we can toggle them off as well. Everything's working. The only thing I'm not super happy about is that we're using an arrow function. It's not the end of the world. Honestly, this is not going to impact performance in any noticeable way, but I like to avoid arrow functions because there is a potential in a real production large application for them to cause problems because we're making a new function every time this is rendered again. And our game doesn't have many die components. There's only 5 at a time on the screen, but still we don't want to be making a bunch of new functions. So what we can do is define our own click handler up here. So naming is kind of tricky. I'm going to call it handle click, which is different than this .props.handle click. So we're defining handle click directly on the die component. This is on the props property of the die component. So I'm going to delete all of this and just say this .handle click. And then handle click is going to call this .props.handle click, which is what was passed down from the dice component. And then we'll pass in this .props.idx. But we're going to have a problem again if I try running this as is because we haven't bound handle click. So we add in our constructor and then this .handle click equals this .handle click.bind this. So the naming is a little confusing, but remember this is our own. We just defined our own method. It has nothing to do with this .props.handle click. This is the magic that is calling the method that was passed down from the game, down to the dice, down to the die. And we pass in the index, and then it goes and updates the state in the game component. All right, so all that we just did shouldn't make a difference to what we see. It should still work. Let's see, I'm going to go for 3s maybe. All right, well, here's a full house, but there's a small problem. Our full house rule doesn't work, and that's one of the first things we're going to change right after this. So we have a problem. That's coming up next.